What's the best Black Sabbath album of the Ozzy era? Today we're ranking them to see what comes out on top. My and everyone else's least favorite Black Sabbath album of the Ozzy era is definitely Technical Ecstasy. Released October 6, 1976, this album was produced by Tony Iommi because the band couldn't trust anybody else to produce the record. This album was recorded in Miami, Florida, where you can hear the influence of the clear skies and the sunshine. All the doom and gloom that's known for Black Sabbath sound was left behind in England. Ozzy even considered quitting the band during this time period. That's how bad it was. There's some technical and dazzling guitar moments on this album, but just not enough to keep me interested. And these are some of the reasons why Technical Ecstasy is my least favorite Sabbath album. Next album on my list, released September 29th, 1978, is Black Sabbath's Never Say Die. It starts off with a bang, as the opener, Never Say Die, kicks off with a nice upbeat feel. It sets the bar really high on positivity, which the rest of the album falls short of. The rest of the album has a jazzier feel to it, which would be fine with any other band, but this is Black Sabbath. I want lightning, thunder, rain. I want the occult. I want dark and despair. It's Black Sabbath! This is the point of the career where it seems that Black Sabbath really started unraveling and coming undone. The band was dabbling in all sorts of substance abuse, and Ozzy was even fired for substance abuse issues. How bad do you have to be to get fired from a band on drugs for your drug use? Anyways, these are some of the reasons why Never Say Die also falls short to the rest of Sabbath's catalog. The album 13, released June 10th of 2013, would be the last and final album that Black Sabbath would put out. Their 19th studio album, and the first one since 1995's Forbidden. This album would feature the return of Ozzy Osbourne as the frontman, would feature Geezer on bass, Tony on guitar, and then drummer Brad Wilk from Rage Against the Machine would replace Bill Ward and round out the lineup. This album would be a return to their roots with a darker feel and a darker sound. However, the cookie-cutter song structures are what does it for me. It just seems very bland and imbalanced. It's also lacking production quality, which with any other band wouldn't be a big deal. But again, this is Black Sabbath. These are the founders of all things heavy. I had higher hopes for this album, however, it doesn't match the quality of their earlier releases. The self-titled Black Sabbath album, released Friday, February 13th, 1970, is a groundbreaking, landmark album that founded an entire genre that we know, heavy metal. This magical album was recorded in one single day and then mixed the following day for a 2-day process. Arguably one of the best albums in history, this is widely considered the very first album of heavy metal. Tony Iommi downtuned his guitar so it'd be easier to perform bends, since he cut off 2 of the tips of his fingers in a table saw accident. He began the recording of this album with a white Fender Stratocaster. However, he switched to the Gibson SG that he is known for today when the white Stratocaster's pickups failed. Iommi ended up stringing this guitar upside down as it was a right-handed guitar and Iommi's a left-handed player. After the recording of the album, Iommi then ran into a right-handed player playing a left-handed SG, also strung upside down. The two agreed that they would swap guitars as it only made sense. Downtuning, his style, and the SG gave a darker sound to the album, which was not present in any of the other albums out at the time. And while this album has some of my favorites on it, like The Wizard, NIB, self-titled Black Sabbath, it only makes it to 6th on my list, because that's just how good these guys were at this time. Sabbath Bloody Sabbath was written shortly after the success of Volume 4, and this is where the band really started to unravel. With the band exhausted from touring in support of Volume 4 and rampant substance abuse issues, this left the band with writer's block for this album. Iommi was frustrated with the lack of input from the other band members, Geezer was frustrated with the reliance of Ozzy upon his lyrics, and Ozzy was battling substance abuse demons. Regardless, the band was still put together just enough to put together a classic album chocked full of hits. Like Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, Killing Yourself to Live, and A National Acrobat are found on this gem. The last 4 albums are where I really ran into difficulty ranking them. Probably listened to each album hundreds of times in my past, but I did come up with a solid list of 4. Number 4 on my list is 1975's Sabotage. This album was titled Sabotage after the legal troubles with former manager Patrick Meehan. The band felt that Patrick Meehan and the record label were ripping them off financially and couldn't be trusted. The frustrations from the legal troubles is what led to a heavier and darker sound I feel on this album. And for that, Mr. Meehan, I personally thank you, because this album kicks ass. Listeners can hear early sounds of thrash metal in the song Symptom of the Universe, but it's also balanced out by some of the beauty in the softer tracks, like the acoustic track, Don't Start Too Late. The album opener, Hole in the Sky, is such a banger, with tracks like Symptom of the Universe and Am I Going Insane not far behind it. This album shows the range that the four can cover with ease, but it also shows the roller coasters of emotions that were plaguing the band at this time. This is definitely a solid album, but not solid enough to make the top 3. Coming in at number 3 is 1972's Volume 4. This album originally had the working title of Snowblind, but the record company made them change the label as they didn't want such an open-air drug reference. They didn't want the controversies that came along with it either. This album shows some of the softer sides, as in the track Changes, which was written about Bill Ward's dissolving marriage and features Tony Iommi on the piano. The key moment in this album for me is the back-to-back tracks of Supernaut and Snowblind. It doesn't get much better than that for me. The speed and urgency of Supernaut makes the listener feel that they're blasting off and zooming through the galaxy in space travel. Just as you're about to explode from racing through the cosmos, Snowblind comes in and screeches you to a halt. The slow churning riffs knock you right back to Earth, and where the frozen grips just hold you in place. This was the period in Sabbath where they were really experimenting with cocaine abuse, and it's clearly evident in their songwriting. The tour that supported this album is also the tour where Tony Iommi collapsed off a stage from exhaustion. This album has a groove running through it that really makes the album flow well, and that is why it's my number 3 choice. Paranoid, released September 18th, 1970, was fresh off of the heels of their successful self-titled release. Sabbath hit the studio only 4 months after the self-titled and was just trying to keep the momentum rolling. This album is critically considered one of the greatest albums of all time in metal and have influenced countless of musicians and bands since its release. The band wanted to title this album War Pigs, but the record label wouldn't allow that either, citing it was too violent. The record label also explained to the band that they needed a couple more minutes of sound for the album, so the band hastily recorded Paranoid, the chart-topping single, in a 2-hour period fresh back from the pub. This golden nugget of sound wasn't too shabby for a couple of guys working under pressure. Many of the lyrics written by Butler had relevant takes on societal issues that were plaguing the world at the time. Anything from the Vietnam War, to the heroin abuse of American GIs, to nuclear holocaust. Some of the more lighthearted subjects that are covered is interplanetary space travel with your lover found on Planet Caravan, or a magnetic superhero who time travels in order to explain to the world about the doom that's impending in the popular track Iron Man. Great riffs, spot-on vocals, rumbling bass, all held together with tight drumming. What could be any better than Paranoid? And now, the top album from Black Sabbath during the Ozzy era is Masters of Reality. Released July 21st, 1971, Master of Reality is the pinnacle of Black Sabbath to me. The album kicks off with the coughing of Tony Iommi and takes a 1.5 steps darker with the opening riffs of Sweet Leaf. The guitar tone contained in the Ode to Mary Jane would become what is the foundation for stoner, sludge, and doom metal to come. And who better to guide these newer bands than the fathers of doom, Black Sabbath? The darker album has a foreboding feel to it that took the listeners into a deeper realm of despair. My favorite and one of the darkest songs in their entire catalog, Children of the Grave, is a cautionary tale to the children of the era and what nuclear holocaust will bring to them. The message included by Ozzy explains to the listeners that if they don't start spreading love between each other, then we're all just going to be children of the grave. The absolutely beautiful instrumental to follow Children of the Grave, Orchid, is one of the softest ballads that also reinforces the message of spreading love throughout the world. This entire album is by far perfection to me and is my favorite Sabbath album of the Ozzy era. What's your ranking of the favorite Sabbath albums of Ozzy era? Let me know in the comments below.